In this video, we're going to take a look at the new GitHub Actions for CloudBees CD. So in the marketplace, you'll see that we have, at the moment, 6 different actions that we can play with in order to communicate to CD. So we've got ones for running procedures, pipelines, processes, and we've also got one to create a release from a template, kick off that release, and then a generic one for executing any DSL. So we'll take a look at several of these in this video. But what we have here is this demo application, this GitHub Actions demo that you'll get the link to below in the CloudBees demos organization. And we're going to walk through the process of setting this up and getting a fully working setup. So to follow along, you're going to need a CloudBees CD instance. You'll also need a GitHub account. We're also using Docker Hub. So when you go to this repo, you're going to use this template option, create a new repository, and then you'll select which owner. And so I'm going to choose just this workshop organization that I have. Just choose whichever one you'd like. And I'm just going to call this GHA demo. And you can make this private or public. I'll just make this public so it's easy to work with. And now you can see I have my own version. It's in my organization now, and it's following whatever name I chose. Quickly, down below, we've got this set of instructions that we'll go through. But to quickly take a look at what's actually in this repo. So we've got this Go application, which is very simple. All this is going to do is it'll take the GitHub SHA that we have for every commit. And so we'll be able to see the differences between these different deployment versions that we have. It also takes an environment variable. And so we'll be able to see which different environment, whether it's development, production, or whatever we want. We also have this GitHub workflows directory, and this is where the GitHub Actions workflows live. So we've got this one called CD setup that we'll go through shortly. And this is going to instantiate the resources inside of CD, and it's going to be using the DSL that we have provided. The other one is our build and deploy. And so this is what's going to do the typical CI process of building and testing our code. Then it's going to build a container image, push it up to Docker Hub, and then we're going to then talk to CD. And if it's on a pull request, it'll just kick off an application deployment. But if it's on a push to main, so if the PR was merged, or if you just push to main, it'll actually create a new release from a template and then kick off that release. So we'll walk through that whole process. And then in this platform content directory, you'll see that we have the DSL files, these Groovy files that define the kind of setup requirements. So if we look at the application.groovy, this is actually going to set up all the requirements, the actual microservice model in CD, the environments, everything that we'll need. So with this ready to go, let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is follow this instruction here where we're going to go into our CD instance. We need to add this app base hostname property. So if we just copy this snippet here, and then if we go into the DSL IDE, so we'll paste this in, but we'll need to update this value to be whatever your hostname is. So in my case, my instance is at this ldemo2.cbdemos.io. Yours could be example.com, whatever your hostname is for your CD instance. This is going to be kind of the base path. And the reason we're doing this is because the applications we're going to be deploying, it needs to have a hostname base path because it's going to append in front of that a specific subdomain. So with that in place, we'll go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. Now I've got this property set. So if we go back to the instructions, you'll see that that's really all we had to do on the CD side. And so now that I've got this repo set, I need to go and update some secrets inside of my repo. So I'll copy this first one. If I go back to, actually it's in the same tab here. So I'll open up a new tab for the settings, go down to secrets and variables, actions, and I'll add a new repository secret. This one's going to be the CDRO URL. And that's just going to be, if I go to my CDRO instance, it's going to be this base path. So again, yours will look different depending on where you're running this. This is what mine looks like. We'll go through the next one where I'll grab a CDRO token. And to do this, if we go to CDRO, go up to the top right and go to Profile, and then click on this Access Tokens. I'll create an access token. Just call mine GHA, save that, Now, you actually want to keep this secret. This is going to be long blown away by the time you're seeing it, so don't worry about that. But you'll use your own token. Again, be sure to keep that secret because that gives anybody access to your server. So the next one that we need to create is going to be Docker Hub user. Create the Docker Hub token, and then we need this GitHub personal access token. And so what this is for is we're going to create a configuration in CDRO that will allow you to communicate back to your repository. So even if you're using a private repo, you'll be able to access it. Okay, so I have those all set now, and we should be good to go. And so you'll see that the next thing we need to do is go to the Actions tab, and we're going to need to kick off. You'll see that this there's actually an initial run just because when we instantiated it, GitHub Actions detects that this needs to be run, but you can ignore that failure. So we're going to go to CD configuration here, and we'll click this Run Workflow. And what this will do is it'll kick off that CD setup YAML, which again, if we look at that, what it's going to do is it'll take the configuration options that we set, or our tokens, and then it's going to run those groovy DSL files that we have, passing in the appropriate arguments, and it's going to evaluate those against the server. So if I click into this, we'll be able to see, and this actually runs fairly quickly, but if I click into any of these, like set up applications and environments, we'll see that it's going to evaluate the DSL and it ran it appropriately. So if I now go back to this CDRO instance, we should see a few things are now available. If I go to the service catalog, we should see that we have this simple release is now available. Additionally, if we go over to the applications, so if we go to deployment automation applications, we now have this demo app, and this is already configured for demo dev and demo prod. So we have everything we need to get started. So let's continue. And so the other thing we can do now is if we actually stay in Actions and go to the build and deploy, as I mentioned previously, if we look at the build and deploy YAML, we can see that it does have this workflow dispatch, which enables us to kick this off at any point in time. And if we use this workflow dispatch, it's going to run just the application deploy. It's not going to do the create release from template or the kickoff release. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But for now, just to show that we can do this, we could either create a pull request, but really what we can also do is just click run workflow, and this whole process will get kicked off. So in just a moment here, I'll have this build and deploy, and we can follow this. And so this will just run through, again, all the basic steps like running the test, running the builds, all this stuff, creating the container image, and then pushing to the registry, and then finally doing the deployment. All right, so we can see that that completed, and this actually gives me info about the job ID and all of that. And if I go into my applications, in fact, we can go to the application process runs. I'll see I have one actively running right now. All right, so now that this is complete, if we go to this demo app up here, so we can see the demo app. In this case, it shows us what the environment is, and it shows us the git commit SHA. Every time that there's a new version that we deploy, we'll be able to see the difference. The background color will change based on the git commit. All right, so that looks good. So now what we can do is if we want to go and change something, you could change source code. I like to just change the README to keep things simple, but I can just add like a space here. And if I go to the top here and just click commit change, updating the README, make sure that we're committing directly to the main branch in this case. Now, if we go to the actions, we've got the update README from the commit that we just made. If we go to build, we'll see that this whole process will start again. So now we can see that this time it actually skipped the application deploy, and it instead created the release from the template and then ran the release. So if we go back to CDRO, if we go to release orchestration, we can see that it has automatically created this release. And if we click into it, you can see this is the SHA that we have for this git commit. And if we go to the pipeline runs, we should see that this is in action. So we've got this deploy to dev. If I go to the summary, we'll see that we have a link back to the original GitHub Actions workflow. So we can actually see what caused this. And then we've also got a link to the application. So if you recall, previously this was like an orange color. Now it's this red. And we've got this new git commit SHA, but we're still in the dev environment. And so I can now manually approve this, and then it'll go and deploy to production. And there we go. That's now complete. So if I go to view deployed application for the production one, so we had, again, this is the dev environment, and then we've got the production environment. We can see it as the exact same git commit SHA, so the color is the same, but now we have the production environment. So you now have a fully functional setup that is using GitHub Actions to do the CI portion, and then it passes over to CDRO to do the release aspect and the deployments. All right, so now let's dive deeper into what was actually going on here. So again, we had this build and deploy workflow where, if you're not familiar with the GitHub Actions syntax, this is just a YAML definition of what this workflow looks like. So we've got this name for what it's called. We have this on block, and this defines essentially what actions need to occur in order for this workflow to get kicked off. And we can define what happens for those different events. So we've got on push, we only care about the main branch. And specifically, we want to ignore anything that changes in the platform content because that's just our DSL files. We also have on pull requests. Only pull request to the main branch, though, will kick off this workflow. And then we have this workflow dispatch, which that's just the manual trigger. We've got the ability to have environment blocks. And so just passing a couple of those in. And then this is going to run on an Ubuntu latest image. And we just go through some normal steps. So we're checking out the code. We're setting up the environment with the appropriate Go version, installing the dependencies, and then building and testing our code. We're logging into Docker Hub using our secrets. And then once that's set up, we do a build and push. So it'll build the container image and then push it again to that Docker Hub user path. And then we're taking the environment variable that we have up above for app name. And then we're tagging it with the GitHub SHA. Now, you're probably not going to want to do this with the GitHub SHA because it's just kind of ugly. You probably want to use a more semantic versioning setup. But for demonstration purposes, it's pretty straightforward. And then now we get into the CDRO actions. We've got this uses syntax where we're calling out to a particular GitHub action. In this case, these are ones that we have, these CloudBees GitHub Actions, and then run process. And so with that, if we actually go back to the marketplace, this is running the run process. So we had the run process action. And you can see here, we have this specification for what needs to be passed in. So it's expecting that we have this CDRO URL and CDRO token. And, we had those secrets set. Then we need to pass in the project name, the application name, which process, the environment that we're targeting, and then any parameters that we're passing in. So you'll notice that we already have those defined. We're setting it in the GitHub Actions or GHA project. It's our demo app. We're going to do the deployment, and we're going to target the demo dev environment. And then we're passing in some parameters of image tag, which again is going to be the GitHub SHA. We've got the image repository, which again, because we're pushing to Docker Hub, we're going to be using the Docker Hub username namespace, and then we're going to pass in the app name. And then kind of the same deal down below, where in this case, we're using the create release from template. And so we're pointing at one of our templates. If I go to the service catalog, if you recall, we have that simple release where it has a few parameters. We've got the release name, got the image tag, the image repository, and all of this is getting passed in by these parameters here. And then we're kicking off running the release using the start release. That one has, because everything was already baked in, I didn't have any parameters that I needed to pass separately. I'm just telling it which release name. And then you also notice we have these conditional statements that define when this action will actually occur. Again, in this case, on a push to the main branch, whereas this one was on a pull request or that workflow dispatch. So with this setup, you have this nice separation of concerns where the development teams can control their own GitHub Actions workflows. They can add in whatever tests they want. They can add in any additional actions. But at the end, we can keep the whole setup nicely inside of CDRO for the release and the deployment process. There are many aspects of CDRO, such as if we go to the applications or the environments, let's say this demo app, you might have access control set as to who is able to do what, when it comes to the approvals and targeting these demo environments. When we're making these calls to CDRO, you have to remember that we're using the user that I'm defining this as, this access token. And so that means that all of those same RBAC rules and everything we've set in CDRO are going to stay as is. And so this whole platform that you've built in CDRO can continue to function exactly as you'd expect. You're just enabling a new interface that developers can work through. And so they can do what they want to do and can pass it off to the platform that's been built out. All right, so that covers everything that we needed to do for this demo. Again, if you want to review this, we have all the instructions in the actual README for this repository. So all the links will be in the description. We also have a documentation page that I'll link to as well. If you're already using CDRO and you're wanting to use GitHub Actions as well, definitely check this out.